So measuring the end float, clamped a piece of angle iron on there, and bolt holes actually lined up, which was a break. And I can't get this perfectly perpendicular, but pretty close. And I measure about 4 mils. Maybe I can get a half a mil out of the angle, because it's angled, but it's a little bit on the low end of the spec. Not sure it's worth all the work to change it though. Okay, update to my Overdrive rebuild. I went and took it to a guy that sells parts and showed it to him, and he immediately said I had a big problem because it's worn here from the planetary gears rubbing. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but there was supposed to be a washer here, number 83, and it was missing. Actually, I'm beginning to think it was entirely consumed, because this now is worn in further than it should be, substantially further. There's a huge ledge here, and there's supposed to be a moderate ledge. So I'm in the process of trying to find a throwout bearing or a thrust bearing that'll fit here and be much thicker than normal to set up the end plate. I'm going to try to have one machine that'll fit in here. And this is kind of rough from the wear too. The actual back of the gears look okay, but most distressing. And another thing I found just cleaning up this piece is there's a lot of passageways in here, and I don't know if it's important in general, but nothing I read seemed to tell you to do this, but mine was so clogged up I couldn't get any fluid through. But in the back of the piston chamber here, there's a hole drilled, and you want to stick a straw down there, but you can't because the hole's actually drilled from the back at an angle up. But you can get the stuff in there and turn this over and let it puddle in there and let gravity do the work. And it feeds down into the accumulator cavity down here through this side, but it's not through the hole where the valve is that you can see. It's through this chamber here. And so there's a hole down in the accumulator cylinder you can't get a straw into either. So it's really hard to clean that out. But I let that soak, and it finally drained in. And then if you go down here through this valve opening, there is a little angled passageway where you can kind of get the straw in and go down this passageway. And I blew out all kinds of gunk. So I'm really glad I did that. And I didn't know that I even had to do it. I just kind of got lucky on that one. So if your Overdrive is gummed up at all, I'd be sure to clean those out and make sure that air or liquid flows through them easily. And also between these, in this thrust bearing area here, there's a passageway right in the middle down there for oil, and that also, I got a lot of gunk out of that guy too. I think he goes on the bottom here on the other side, but I didn't scope him out real accurately. But he does drain to one side. If you put solvent in there and go one way, it puddles, and then if you go the other way, I can get it to drain. And again, I got gunk out like crazy when I did that, and that's after an initial cleaning to begin with. Okay, I'm sort of back onto the transmission while I wait for Overdrive parts. So I got to take this circlip off and the bearing off. How lucky am I? That just fits perfectly in the bottom of the press. Okay, so bearing is off. There's an oil slinger behind it there. And that's about it. At least I think this is an oil slinger. I think that's what they call it. I believe it's supposed to be dished, although mine seems to be flat, but I'm not sure about those things yet. I have to double check. This is the input shaft in case that's not obvious. And now I'm going to pull out these needle bearings because they're going to get replaced. Here's the pilot bearing puller arrangement. This guy's got some hooks on him to grab it, and then you can pull it out in theory. However, in practice, it broke the case. So that's not good news. Okay, that needle bearing cage is out. That thing is really in there tight. was able to get it out by working the slide hammer around so the two jaws weren't pulling in the same place all the time. I'd whack it a few times, rotate, whack it a few times, and it finally came out. Taking the needle bearings out of the lay shaft. That's no joy with this clip they have in there, which you have to compress, but there's really no way to grab it. I was able to get it by actually getting one end down below the groove and then putting a shim in and then popping the end of the clip over the shim into the outer side of the groove, and then it would come out, but it's a little tricky. And then they have this little spacer in here with a bevel on it to sit in the bottom of the shaft there. Here's a shot of how that input shaft goes together. There's this oil slinger or something they call it, the bearing, a washer or a shim, and then the circlip that goes in this groove right here. Hold it all together. I have beat the snap ring from hell. So I put in these shims. They're 1/4 inch and by 32 mils. And that was just a hair too thin. So I have some 12 mil shim stock, and I put one of those behind each one of these guys, and it's not easy to get them in. You got to kind of work the circlip open and wiggle and push them in, and I still couldn't get the circlip over. Then I had this smart idea of having just the weight of the press arm on it, and with it close, then I opened this just a hair, and the shaft started to drop right out. So this worked pretty well once I got it set up. It might even work if I didn't have the shim stock in there. The problem is, by yourself, you can't hold everything. And with the circlip off, here are the parts in the order they come off the shaft. And this guy apparently cracks, so you have to check for a crack. I guess you can tap it, and if you're good, you can hear the difference. Okay, checking the float on the bushing for, I think that's second gear. And you're supposed to put a feeler gauge in here, but because it's down in there, it's hard to angle it, really know what you're getting. So I'm trying a dial indicator. This is not super accurate, but I think it's better than a feeler gauge, and I think I'm right at 8, which is the limit. And this is checking the float of, I don't know, first gear, is it? So I have the bushing in and this piece that fit on top of this socket, so that I'm holding it the way it is with the clip on. And if I do that, put my straight edge across, I'm at about 4 or 5 mils, which is good. Okay, while I'm fighting other problems, I have to have a custom thrust washer machined, I think. Gonna take this apart because this bearing's got some wobble in it, so that's gonna have to be replaced at I think it was $60. Here's my setup for removing this bearing. First step was to get this clutch deal off, and thankfully it wasn't on there very tight, because all I could do was tap it down with setup like this. I thought that first snap ring was big until I uncovered this monster. So I have to take that one off and then press out the bearing, I guess. And that's what happens when you buy cheap snap ring pliers. That came out quite easily, and I'm kind of glad I took it apart. I should have anyway, because there was a lot of gunk back in there that I was able to clean out with the bearing out. And it's got a number on it. Looks like KLNJ50. So maybe I can buy that somewhere else cheaper. Let's see, what's it say there is R and M, KLN J50, could be U50, 45.97.